Hello and welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige. Quick reminder that you can kick off your Super Bowl Sunday with the Reverie True Crime virtual live show on moment.co/Reverie True Crime. You can watch the show and interact with me and my special guest co-host, JT from Brew Crime, and we'll be done right before kickoff time. Also, you can come meet a lot of your favorite podcasters, survivors, advocates, and victims' families at the True Crime and Paranormal Podcast Festival this summer in Austin, Texas. We'll be there from August 25th until the 27th. To learn more, go to truecrimepodcastfestival.com. Also, when you go to the Buy Tickets page, scroll to the bottom and you'll see tickets for attendees, and there's an option for vendors as well. With all of that being said, let's get into today's episode. When we left off last week, investigators were hot on Henry's trail, and in this episode, we will begin at the scene of the arrest. Let's jump right into it. The 28-year-old serial killer, Henry Louis Wallace, was finally arrested on March 13, 1994. Authorities showed up at one of his friend's apartments on the warrant he had for not showing up to court in February for a shoplifting charge. They lifted fingerprints off Betty Jean Baucom's car, and they came back as a match to Henry's. So they started calling his neighbors and friends in an attempt to track down his whereabouts. Due to the policy of needing arrest warrants, which they didn't have until the day after the last victim was murdered, they would have been violating policy if they would have put his picture out to the public in any way to alert the community. Therefore, unfortunately, nobody was even aware he was a suspect for a few days. In one way, that's a good thing, because if he would have saw that he was wanted, that could have caused him to flee and do God knows what. But also, it's bad for the community to not know the serial killer is someone pretty much everyone in the area knows, and he could have struck again before they were able to arrest him. Henry called his girlfriend and wept to her after his arrest. Then he sat for over 12 hours confessing to each murder, even going into detail about another young lady he killed before he made the move to Charlotte, North Carolina, which was Tashonda Bethea. She was the first victim we discussed in part 1. Henry could describe each murder in great detail, down to what each woman looked like. Police described him as a crack addict who moved from apartment to apartment in Charlotte. All of the victims were young black women who Henry was acquainted with, so he never had to use forced entry into any of their homes. After police realized all the victims were connected, people came forward to talk about how they knew the victims and Henry Wallace. When the police picked him up for questioning on March 13th, he told everything. As we talked about in part 1, Caroline's body was taken into the woods and she was never found. Henry took the police to those woods where nothing but her bones remained. Henry's family and friends were also shocked because they only saw Henry as a normal, ordinary person. The day before he was arrested, he had even called his mother, Lottie, who still lived in Barnwell, South Carolina, to let her know he was all right and doing well in Charlotte. Lottie was working a 12-hour shift, and when she got off work, she found out her son had been arrested for 10 murders. After Henry was arrested, he called his mother, and right before hanging up, he said, quote, "I never had nobody to stand by me." Then he told her he would call her later if he was allowed to. The mother of his baby, Wanda Harrison, found out through the news on television in utter shock, seeing the man she worked beside at Taco Bell who would pick on her just to see her smile and who swept her off her feet and took her on dates to comedy clubs. The father of her child was the one who killed at least 10 young women. She thought back to the time when their baby was born, and Henry arrived at the hospital with a friendship ring. Wanda had not seen him since the month of September, when she had their baby girl, but when she saw him on the news, she said that was not the Henry she knew at all. Quote, "He was so nice to me. He was always friendly and he always wanted to help. He was always buying me stuff and he bought things for the baby. He was just too nice, especially compared to what I was used to." Wanda was so distraught and wondered what she would say to their daughter when she was old enough to ask about her dad. Quote, "I've worried about it. I don't know what I'll tell her about him. I don't know if I'll tell her anything." Everyone who knew Henry was speechless. Valencia Jumper's sister Vanessa said that it was really difficult to digest the fact that Henry was capable of these things, saying, quote, "We know Henry." A neighbor and friend of Henry's, Terrell, said, quote, "He could say things that women like to hear. He wasn't no Denzel Washington, but he got to all those girls. He was a regular laid-back guy. He'd sit in the backyard with us and drink beer. If we cooked out, he'd flip the burgers. At parties, he was the DJ. If what they're saying about him is true, he fooled everybody. Fooled all of us real bad. He had another life that we never saw." Not only were people mourning the loss of their loved ones, but also mourning the death of this person they thought they knew, the death of who he portrayed himself to be. Vanessa tried to call his sister Yvonne because she wanted her to know she didn't need to feel responsible for the actions of her brother. The two young women were really close, so I know Vanessa likely wanted to comfort her, and I'm sure Yvonne felt some guilt, which she should not have. But there has to be so many emotional and mental struggles with something like this. Having people who love you and surround you during a time like this is important. At the same time, I'm sure there are times you'll want to be alone. But it's nice to know that if you need someone, they'll be there. The tremendous amount of grief that all the families and friends were going through is just a lot to even comprehend. When Vanessa found out that her beloved sister was one of Henry Louis Wallace's victims, she said, quote, "Grieving is bad enough. Now, 7 months later, It's hitting just as hard as when they called the first time. I know my sister. I know how we were raised. The last thing you do at night is you check your door and you check your stove. The police chief was really elated about finally arresting the killer, telling the community that they should feel some sense of relief, but the police were facing a lot of harsh criticism and accusations. The Black community were outraged, rightfully so, that the victims were totally thrown to the wayside, likely because they were Black, and that's heartbreaking. One woman said that the police didn't care because they saw these young women as, quote, fast girls who hang out a lot. Shauna Hawk's mother, Dee Sumter, said, quote, the victims were not prominent people with social economic status. They were not special, and they were Black. Dennis Nowicki, Charlotte's police chief, said he had no idea there was a serial killer on the loose until March of 1994, when there were 3 slain young Black women within 4 days of each other. They'd also reached out to the FBI early on, asking for their help, but the FBI did not believe these murders were carried out by a serial killer. The community was given an apology by the Charlotte Mecklenburg PD for not catching on to the connections between these murders way sooner than they did. The police also said that the murders varied in certain ways, which threw them off Henry Wallace's tracks. At the same time, the common denominator in all of these cases was Henry Wallace. They were all either so-called friends of his or worked with him. I just don't think there was too much investigative work going on, if any, in these cases, and it's more than disappointing. When Henry started killing more frequently in March of '94, the murders were sporadic and not entirely similar. The police chief stated, quote, we didn't start seeing a pattern until the Brandy Henderson slaying. Up to that point, we had 7 victims. 3 were strangled, 1 was stabbed, 1 was killed by a blow to the head, 1 was a missing person, and the other was a fire victim. Neighbors of Henry's were in a state of shock. A married couple moved into the Granville Apartments near Henry after Audrey Spain was murdered at the same apartment complex they were living in. When they moved into the new apartment, Henry came over to their place and welcomed them with open arms into the neighborhood. They would talk to him often and thought he was super nice. He had a great attitude towards women. The neighbor said Henry would pull her chair out and light her cigarette, just very much the gentleman type. After she and her husband found out that he had been arrested for 10 murders, it made her reflect on things that she didn't really pay much attention to at the time, such as a little shift in his personality, and he was seemingly wandering aimlessly at times. She thought he was likely on drugs, and maybe that played a part in the murders. The police agreed, saying some of the women that he killed he did steal from and pawn their belongings to possibly support his addiction to crack. And later they stood by that belief of that being his motive, to make friends with these young women, kill them, then take money or rob them of items so he could buy drugs. In 1993, One of Henry's friends said he was trying to kick his drug habit. At least, that's what Henry told him. Larry Spencer said, quote, "He said he was trying to get his life straight. I told him to take it one day at a time." For a while, it's suspected that Henry had stopped using, but people started noticing after a while that he seemed to be using again right before he and his at-the-time girlfriend broke up in February, a month before he was arrested. She said she could not put up with his crack cocaine use any longer, and even filed several police reports detailing Henry physically abusing her and stealing her money for drugs. They were also arguing over another woman, 25-year-old Wanda Harrison, who we know now had a baby by Henry in September of 1993. When he and his girlfriend were together, he was well put together. He stayed clean-shaven, he dressed nice, he spoke and acted really proper, but towards the end of their relationship, all of that changed. He shaved off all of his hair. He noticeably was losing weight, and he sold everything he owned. Lottie told her son that she had a job waiting for him in Barnwell at a mill if he wanted to come back home. Henry almost did go back home, even buying a bus ticket. As we know, he didn't leave Charlotte, and 2 more women were killed. After Brandy Henderson's body was found, Henry went to his friend Larry's where the 2 and some other guys were talking about the killings. Henry said, quote, "I know some people up there. Who is it?" When Larry Spencer said it was Brandy, Henry said, "Oh man, I know her." As they were talking, another friend named Devin said, quote, "The damn maniac tried to kill her baby too." Henry dramatically threw his hands over his face, exclaiming, "What? No! I can't believe it." A few days before his arrest, Henry was walking around the area. He had wrecked his car, so he walked everywhere. Larry and Devin were riding by and saw Henry. Larry said they could not believe how bad he looked and that he was really going downhill. That night, Larry and Devin left the bar and went to Larry's apartment. They sat down to play spades. Devin saw Larry looking off into space and asked him, "What's on your mind?" Larry responded, "I was thinking about those girls who were strangled. You don't think Henry had anything to do with it, do you?" Devin replied, "You know, I was just thinking the same thing. You don't think that's possible, do you?" They both looked at each other and at the same time said, "Nah." Then they chuckled. That same night, Henry called Wanda, the mother of his baby girl, and said it was time for him to come back to his hometown. He told her he'd made some money and he was going to start handling his responsibilities and taking care of his daughter. The next morning, he went over to Larry's and asked to use his phone. He called his ex-girlfriend and they were talking when suddenly Larry walked in on Henry on the phone and he was breaking down. When he hung up the phone with his ex, he told Larry, quote, "She doesn't understand me, man. Nobody understands me." A few minutes later, he made a phone call to the bus station to see when he could get to his hometown of Barnwell. The murder of Deborah Slaughter would happen soon after, and when police lifted his prints from Betty Jean's car, finding out they were Henry's, he may have gotten wind of it somehow. He went to a different apartment complex where another friend stayed, and when the police found him there, Henry was hiding in the bathroom. One of Henry's high school classmates, Marcia Brown, saw him all the time. She couldn't wrap her mind around the fact that the guy they lovingly called Bubba could do these unthinkable acts. Marcia said, "He had it all. There wasn't anything about Bubba to dislike. He had a job, and his mama gave him everything he wanted." Shauna Hawk's mother, Dee Sumter, was rightfully angry and, like she said, quote, "It doesn't take a PhD to realize that gross negligence is involved here. I am outraged. I'm hurt beyond hurt. Any relief I got from knowing who did this is overshadowed by shock that it was allowed to go on and on." Kelly Alexander from the NAACP said, quote, "The Charlotte Police Department dropped the ball. This is a big mistake that may have cost some lives, and is the type of mistake that cannot be allowed to happen again. What it comes down to is a group of investigators who are heavily worked and have to make a lot of snap decisions. And in those decisions, they tend to depreciate crime in the Black community." However, Police Captain Matt Hunter did not agree with that statement at all. Quote, "That's bull. This is not a black-white issue. Most of the homicides we investigate involve Black victims, and we have a very good record in solving them." Another issue that police admitted was that there were different investigators on different cases, so that also prevented a link being made. They said they were reviewing everything to see what they may have missed, and if anything should have raised concerns as many times as they had questioned Henry, as well as when they were investigating if they just screwed up somewhere. One Bojangles employee, Felicia Teal, recalled seeing Henry come to the fast food place with his girlfriend so she could pick up her paycheck. When Felicia was talked to about Bojangles employees found dead or not showing back up, she said people come and go from the job every day, and normally people don't stay around long enough for you to even know their names, due to either the low pay or just not liking the job. The spokesperson for Bojangles said the high turnover with cashiers and cooks, they work a few weeks and you never see them again. Felicia said she was so relieved and hoped that she would be able to sleep better at night now that Henry was locked away. Deborah Slaughter's sister, Linda Ball, said, quote, "I definitely want some answers. If he was a suspect so long ago, why did it take this long to catch him? Why did my sister have to die? I'd hate to think she had to die because they didn't move fast enough." Henry was not only charged with 10 murders so far, but he was also suspected to have been involved with the disappearances of many more young women. In May of 1987, 30-year-old Pernetta Riddle lived in Allendale and was a nurse in a private home. One Saturday, she was supposed to go into work, but she never did. Her boss called and called, but no answer. So Pernetta's sister, Lucille, called one of their cousins who lived in the complex and cried out for help. She begged him to get the manager and get into Pernetta's room. Lucille rang her cousin's phone again and he said, quote, "You gotta come over here. I found your sister. She's dead." Police arrived at the apartment where Pernetta had been strangled with a headband, and she was killed at least a day and a half before she was found. The police chief said they were in limbo, but he was personally going back to Charlotte to interrogate Henry again while making him look at a photo of Pernetta and other evidence. Lucille said the house looked very clean, as if Pernetta had cleaned it the day before. She and her family could not find anything. There was no force of entry and nothing the killer left behind. Not only the fact that there was no force of entry, which was Henry's way of slipping in as the nice guy that people thought they sort of knew, but also Lucille said her sister had just gotten her income tax returns, and on top of that, she was paid that day. The family only found $1 in her pocket and no other money in her house. Lucille says she knows for a fact that her sister knew her attacker, or there would have been forced entry and evidence of a struggle. Pernetta's older sister Lucille said it turned the whole family upside down, and that their mother had never recovered from it. It traumatized their mother so bad that she was forgetting things like what day it was or even the month. In 1990, 29-year-old Sherry Denise Jenkins was discovered in a wooded area on January 12th. She had been stabbed to death. Authorities were investigating to see if there were any connections between her and Henry. He was in the area when Sherry was murdered, and they hung around the same people. Authorities could not say much other than that. The police chief said they were not just grasping at straws. Quote, "Unsolved cases gnaw at you, and this is one that has been gnawing at us for a long time." In 1991, this incident was not a murder, but the police chief said a lady called him and said she was 100% sure Henry Wallace was the one who raped her at a doctor's office. That was 3 years prior, and I don't see anything that says they even looked into that. 26-year-old Rita Maxwell left her house on March 1st of 1992. She said she would be back soon, but she never returned. Her sister Lisa reported her missing on March 17th. Reported missing on March 25th of 1992 was 29-year-old Devon DeBose. She and Rita Maxwell did spend their time at houses known for selling and using crack, and the two young women were known to prostitute on the corner of Rozelle's Ferry Road, which is not far from where one victim of Henry's, Sharon Nance, was found in June of 1992. Devon had actually not been heard from since January 17th. 29-year-old Judy Carolyn Leggett was reported missing by her mother Catherine on June 15th, 1992, after she was last seen visiting her sister Joanne. Judy told her sister she was going to walk up the street and she'd be right back, but she was never seen alive again. Neighborhood kids discovered a body decomposed in the woods off of Interstate 85 on June 24th. It was indeed Judy. She was a high school graduate who was employed at a Presbyterian hospital cafeteria. She had 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl, all in preschool. They were living with family members at that point. Her mother, Catherine, said, quote, "I'm hoping they will find some connection. If he's not the one, I hope that they'll find the one who did. I'd like the man to look all the people and mothers in the face when he gets to court to see what he has done to these people's families." 18-year-old Tashonda Bethea, who we discussed in part 1, was Henry's first known kill, and she was one of the 4 they suspected Henry murdered. She, again for a refresher, was found by a little boy just going fishing. Tashonda was almost naked and face down in a pond near Henry's hometown in 1990. Tashonda was a good friend and roommate to one of Henry's female friends and a senior in high school. Witnesses went to the police and said Henry was the last person Tashonda was seen with before she went missing. Henry confessed to killing her, saying he was angry because Tashonda was avoiding him. Henry liked Tashonda, and they had gone out to places together, and he brought her lunch to school for her. He felt as if Tashonda was only using him, and those were his reasons for doing what he did. Henry claimed he was only going to rape her, but when she said she was going to tell, that's when he killed her. Henry was charged with her murder after he confessed that he took Tashonda off into the woods, raped her, strangled her, cut her wrists, cut her throat, and threw her into the pond. He was officially charged with 11 murders. We know Henry Louis Wallace is a serial killer, but like I said in the first episode, he wasn't a typical one. In the early 1990s, the FBI and psychological professionals who had this long list of types of serial killers, which detailed each type's patterns, behaviors, how each one kills. It was a very thorough list that I looked at, but it was a lot. The main point here is Henry did not fit in any of those categories or types of serial killers that they had studied. Back then, the typical serial killer that the FBI and psychology experts really knew about were white males, middle class, and they stalked people they did not know. While Henry, a black man, working class, was murdering young black women who were acquaintances and friends. So because of this, the experts were actually mind blown that they may have to get to work on a whole new serial killer profile that they didn't know existed. Robert Ressler, a serial killer profiler who a lot of you may know about, said, quote, "If he elected to become a serial killer, he was going about it the wrong way. Mr. Wallace always seemed to take 1 step forward and 2 steps back. He would take items and put them in the stove to destroy them by burning them, but he forgot to turn the stove on." Henry's mother, Lottie, was having a really hard time. She said, quote, "It's like you're in a dream and you're eventually going to wake up. That's how it seems to me. You don't know what your children are doing, so what can you say?" When asked about the 2 phone calls she had with Henry since he was charged and if he said anything about the murders, Lottie said, quote, He said it was something that happened in his head and he couldn't explain it. He said he hoped nobody thought I did a bad job raising him. Even though throughout Henry's young adult life, he and his mother and sister talked and visited frequently, it was only the month before he was arrested that they found out he was using crack cocaine and that the drug had a real hold on him. Then they all found out he was arrested through the news. Henry never told them about things he was struggling with or when he was going through something. Lottie said he would have rather died than for her to find out about all he had done. Lottie Mae was so confused because she raised both of their children to be good people, to make good choices, and she wanted for them to be in a better position than her, saying she worked long hours at a sock factory just to keep Henry and Yvonne fed, clothed, and in school. Lottie did not want her children to struggle like she had. She wanted better for them, and I know most parents want that for their kids. Unfortunately, when left to their own devices, you can't really predict what kind of people they will turn out to be or what they will do. I think parents just have to hope for the best. I believe Lottie did all she could possibly do and that she did a good job raising her kids. Henry did make a lot of allegations of abuse, and I'm not sure if he made that up or not. Either way, when your children venture off into the world, no matter how much you have done for them, what you've taught them, the tools that you've provided them with, it's ultimately up to your children which paths they take, how they choose to live their lives, and it doesn't always go as you hope. People take roads in life that are not the best, unfortunately, and it can lead to doing heinous things that you would never think they were capable of. Henry was in his 20s when he started going down a dangerous path. He made those choices. Lottie did everything she could do while Henry was under her roof, and I hope she realized that it wasn't anything she did or didn't do. Lottie and the kids' dad were never married, and he died many, many years before any of this. She raised Yvonne and Henry on her own with no help at all. I thought maybe the death of his father could have impacted him in some way, but Lottie said, quote, "To tell you the truth, I don't know that he really knew his daddy that well. It didn't seem to hurt him. I gave him everything he needed. He had more than a lot of kids." She also talked about how both of her kids had great manners, did their homework, school activities, held down their part-time jobs, they were respectful to everyone, and she took them to church every Sunday that she could. Tashonda Bethea's Aunt Marguerite went to see Lottie, and she just wanted to tell her that she remembered Henry as a little boy, and just as Lottie could not understand how this happened, neither could Marguerite. One of the victim's sisters called Henry's sister, seeking some kind of answers, but Yvonne didn't have any. Yvonne said, quote, "We feel sorry for them that these things happened. Those lives did not have to be taken." Lottie said that she could not bear to see her son and would rather go to work and try to give herself a little time because, quote, "He hurt me and I just don't want to see him right now. I'd be afraid I'd say something I shouldn't say. I don't know whether it would be pleasant or unpleasant. Alfonso Slaughter, the father of Deborah Slaughter, was asked what punishment he thought Henry deserved. Quote, "There can be no plea bargains. I feel strongly that the jury must give this man the death penalty." Dee Sumter, the mother of Shauna Hawk, created Mothers of Murdered Offspring, a support group for families whose children had their lives taken from them. At the time, there were almost 80 members whose children were murder victims. She worked hard at not only keeping her daughter's legacy alive, but also for other children. Dee bought a new license plate for her car that said Shauna, and she gathered everything she could find of her daughters to place all around her house. Quote, "I cannot allow her life of 20 years and her rich and full legacy to go in vain. So many hearts have been healed because of her. I want him to be fried, in plain and vernacular terms. Nothing less than death for him would be the appropriate sentence." Dee issued an appeal on March 17, 1994, to get more people on the homicide squad of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. Dee made it clear that she was not on some, quote, witch hunt, and she did not want to get wrapped up in the racial rigmarole of the whole thing. Quote, "Whether they're black, white, or whatever, we just want these crimes investigated properly." Dee said she and her group were going to be requesting of the city officials to, quote, "find additional funds to hire staff and investigators, stop the rotating of police officers in and out of the squad at 5 and 7 year intervals, and to provide better, more thorough training for all investigators." Dee also said the city needed to hire staff members who would relay information to the families of victims on a regular basis. Dee had really great ideas, even saying the police department would benefit from, quote, "creating an information unit within the ranks to share material on investigations." One of the members of Mothers of Murdered Offspring, named Judy, said they were just trying to help because, quote, "there simply are not enough of them to get the job done right." The assistant city manager did say that there were 13 homicide investigators in the department, and they would be analyzing everything Dee and her group said, which he claimed could result in a bigger homicide bureau. Dee was asked if she was mad at the police. She responded, quote, "To say I'm angry with the police is inaccurate. I was displeased, but I'm grateful that they've created an open-door atmosphere. It's easier for me to not be angry. If I'm angry with anyone, it's Henry Wallace for all the evil he has wrought." In part 1, I talked about the police arguing that a child victim was not telling the truth about what she said happened to her and the things she said took place with police. Well, now the police were saying Dee Sumter was lying when she said she tried to get investigators to look into the, quote, "fast food connection" between all of these cases after her daughter was killed in February of '93. Authorities said they never even heard from her. It took 2 years before Henry Wallace's trial started. It kept being put off due to figuring out the venue, gathering DNA evidence from the victims and crime scenes, and selecting jurors. 1 year after his arrest, Henry's defense team and the prosecutors did not want statements made on tape by Henry to be released to the public yet. Henry's attorneys said the statements he made had illegally been obtained and a fair trial would be nearly impossible if those tapes were to be released, and if the tapes were released, prosecutors said they would have to move the trial out of Mecklenburg County. Prosecutors and the defense attorneys would be asking the judge for the upcoming hearing to be closed to the press and the public because they, along with most of the victims' families, did not want Henry's statements revealed to the public. Though the Charlotte Observer, the North Carolina Press Association, and Charlotte television stations were going to argue to keep the hearing open. A lawyer for the Observer stated, quote, "This hearing will focus on what may be the most important ruling in these cases, the admissibility of the defendant's statements to police. Courts have many options that will protect the defendant's right to a fair trial while keeping proceedings open to the public." Henry's defense team also did not want the jury to hear what he said on those tapes after he was arrested. It was chilling and filled with macabre details. However, prosecutors were going to fight to have those tapes heard during trial. Henry pleaded not guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder, 8 counts of first-degree rape, and 18 other crimes that included sex offenses, armed robbery, and arson. Henry was also facing a murder charge in Barnwell for killing Tashonda Bethia. Henry's argument was that he was so addled by drugs that he could not form the intention to kill. Prosecutors in Mecklenburg County were seeking the death penalty. No trial date had been nailed down yet, and the judge was not sure at this point if he was going to join 9 of the 10 murder cases in one trial or try them all separately. April 5, 1995 was Henry's Mecklenburg Superior Court hearing, and confessions from the tape were played. He told in-depth the details of the sex crimes, stabbings, and strangulations. On one of the recordings, he stated, quote, "I can't really say I had control of what I was doing, but I knew that I was doing something wrong. It was like when I started, there was a point when I had to say to myself, stop. But it wasn't to be. I couldn't stop." Henry also talked about how his crack cocaine use was getting worse a few weeks before his arrest. When Henry was a kid, he remembers hearing that a neighbor had been raped and murdered, and he created this image in his mind of what that would look like, and that haunted him ever since. Henry went on to talk about the murders. He wasn't showing much emotion, if any, and spoke of each woman in such detail that he could describe the clothes they were wearing at the time, the inside of their apartments, and even the fillings in one of the victim's teeth. Henry said he would revisit the crime scenes 4 times or more, sometimes even calling people from those apartments, smoking crack there, or to see if the victims were actually dead. He was brutally honest about how he spaced out most of the murders on purpose, changing his methods of disposing of their bodies, and he would not only clean up the crime scenes the best he could, but he would move the bodies around, sometimes bathe the bodies, and change the way the crime scene looked. Henry went on to explain to the police how he would take t-shirts, towels, bras, and baby blankets, whatever he could get his hands on, and tie them in knots to strangle the young women. Of one of the victims, he said, quote, "She was a strong fighter for life. She kept fighting for air." Henry was asked why he chose to set Valencia Jumper's body on fire. In response, quote, "I didn't want her murder scene to seem like the others. I didn't want to continue a chain." He claimed he only wanted to rob Deborah Slaughter so he could buy drugs, but she was fighting him back, and she was stronger than he thought she was. She fought till the very end, as her aunt had hoped. At the hearing, which went on for 6 days, the judge had to make the call as to whether or not these tapes would be played during the trial for the jurors to hear. The judge sat back and listened to the tapes with headphones on. Henry's defense attorney said police extracted many hours of his confessions illegally, and they did not believe they should be played for the jury because of that. The attorneys went on to say that Henry was really exhausted, under the influence of crack when he gave his confessions, and they claimed police did not tell Henry his rights. It was reported that in the tapes, Henry seemed very eager to tell all the details and wanted to talk. His voice cracked once when he thanked the investigators for taking the time to listen to him, and he felt a huge weight had been lifted. The homicide supervisor asked, "What made you decide to tell us?" Henry responded, "It's gotta end. Everything's gotta end. I'm doing this, first of all, because I know it's going to be a very long time before I hit the streets again. If I'm convicted of the 2, I might as well tell about all of them. I'll never live a day outside of the penitentiary." The 2 victims were the ones police had more than enough evidence to convict him of, and he knew that. In another part of the tape, he told authorities, quote, "With the problem I have now with drug abuse, this probably would have lasted at the pace of the last few days. The killing would have continued, and I would have killed myself." On September 30th of 1996, Henry's trial began. It was reported by the newspapers that Henry's defense team had been fighting to get a different venue out of Mecklenburg because a poll result showed that 92% of people in the area knew Henry, believed he was guilty, and should die for his crimes. The prosecutor argued that the trial should be in Mecklenburg, and due to the defense trying to get a new venue, the trial might not start for another month. Prosecutor Marcia Goodnow, formerly an Air Force attorney, had at most 100 witnesses to testify. The trial went on as planned in Mecklenburg. The two most important pieces of evidence against Henry was his DNA being found and the taped confessions. The defense team won the rights to conduct their own DNA tests. The DNA tests that were conducted already connected Henry to a few of the murder scenes and excluded him from others. Prosecutors won the rights to play certain parts of the 10 to 12-hour tapes during trial. Prosecutor Marcia Goodnow's opening statement included asking jurors to give Henry the death penalty. Henry's defense attorney, Isabel Day, in her opening statement, asked the jurors to instead consider a life sentence since Henry was battling mental illness, the murders were not deliberate or premeditated, and he was not legally competent when the murders were committed. Therefore, it wasn't first-degree murder. Faye Sultan, a psychologist, took the stand, saying ever since the day he was brought into this world, Henry's mother would physically and mentally abuse him. Faye also said that during the murderous whirlwind, Henry was suffering from mental illness and asked the jury to consider giving him life without parole instead of the death penalty. After court, she told reporters, quote, "I would contend that he doesn't have a complete personality, rather fragments, fractions of personality traits that come together in a deviant and destructive way." Faye diagnosed Henry as having aspects of a half-dozen personality disturbances, which include paranoia, narcissism, dependence, depression, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. A New York social worker who was a witness for the defense, Carmetta Alvarez, stated, quote, "Henry Louis Wallace became the object onto which Lottie Wallace projected her feelings of rage towards the men who caused her pain. She took the essence of his life away from him and rendered him into a shell. It is no wonder that little Henry Wallace became the available sex toy for the young girls in the community." However, this was based on what Henry told them about his mother. Prosecutors said if they were going to bring up Lottie, that they needed to get her on the witness stand to testify for herself. Ultimately, Henry's mother refused to talk to reporters about anything, and she never showed up to the trial at any point. A professor of psychiatric nursing at the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Ann Burgess, also testified. She had the same opinion of the other defense's expert witnesses and said Henry suffered from mixed personality disorder. Quote, "This mental illness did impair his ability to form intent." Dr. Burgess said the traits he showed were obsessive-compulsive disorder, paranoid personality disorder, schizophrenia, dependent personality disorder, and narcissism. She told the jury, quote, "He has a personality with a lot of holes in it, like Swiss cheese." Also telling the jury that his surroundings and social conditions helped to create his mental health issues, citing not having a man in his life as a father figure, early exposure to sexual exploitation, as Henry said he was sexually abused by girls in his neighborhood when he was 4 and 5 years old, being abused by his wife to support a child who wasn't his, living in poverty, poor potty training, and receiving harsh discipline from his mother, such as beatings with extension cords, garden hoses, toy car racetracks, and she humiliated him, which caused him to be so nervous all the time that he had bowel accidents until he was around 12 years old. Dr. Burgess said the reason he did so well when he was younger, graduating high school and getting into the Navy, was that he was able to function in those environments because he had people around him who supported him at the time. As he got older and more removed from that support system, she said he could not handle it and would take his anger out on black women. Quote, "These were people who did not have power over him. They were his peers. It involved acts of violence. A component was that he would strike out and injure these women. Once his sexual fantasy was activated, he was unable to stop it." Henry's words on the tapes could have convinced the jury that he was mentally incompetent at the time of the murders, as he said he did not have any intention of killing Shauna Hawk, that when he killed Audrey Spain, he acted like a madman, and he said killing Caroline Love was an out-of-body experience. In December of 1996, the jury had already heard Henry in his own words describing on the tapes what he had done, but they listened a second time as they took notes. They heard Henry talk about how he went back to Deborah Slaughter's apartment, put on her Chicago White Sox coat, grabbed a beer out of the fridge, and walked right back out. One of the investigators asked if he found it challenging at all to disable and kill women. Henry said, quote, "Well, there was, I guess, a reward in a sense if I was able to go in and disable a female, because if I wanted to engage in sex, I could have sex and I could rob them all at the same time." Robert Ressler testified for the defense, and as we know, he was mind-boggled about the atypical serial killer. He said, quote, "He's all over the spectrum. I never got a good statement from him about why he did this." The jury deliberated for 15 hours over the span of a few days. On January 7th, 1997, they found Henry Wallace guilty of killing 9 of the 11 women, returning a verdict of 9 counts of first-degree murder, 8 counts of first-degree rape, and 1 count of second-degree rape. Along with that, he was charged with assault with a deadly weapon with intent for attempting to strangle Brandy Henderson's 10-month-old baby, Tyrese, with a pair of shorts. The jury found him guilty on a lesser charge of a misdemeanor for assault with a deadly weapon, and they found him guilty of a misdemeanor for assaulting a child under the age of 12. As the verdicts were being read, Henry sat there, listening, with no emotions, looking down and putting his hand on his forehead. Valencia Jumper's sister, Vanessa, said, quote, "I still see no remorse. He didn't seem upset to me, even after they found him guilty. I just wish he could die while he was being tortured like he tortured each of those girls." Brandy Henderson's cousin, George, said, quote, "I'm just glad it's finally over. I'm real exhausted. This is the part I wanted to see. The sentencing I don't care about. That's up to the jury. Henry received 9 death sentences on January 29, 1997. Henry made a statement to the victims' families before he was taken to prison. Quote, "What words in any language can I say that will bring you comfort, quiet the storm, or release you from the mental prison I have put you in? I'm sorry. I apologize. I didn't mean to do it. I profess that all of these words and all that I know fall far short of what's needed to console any of you. I know that it is hard to believe, but I suffer a great loss with each and every one of you. None of these women, none of your daughters, mothers, sisters, a princess, several friends, a partner, a sister, or family members in any way deserved what they got. They did nothing to me that warranted their death." As Henry read from the Bible, asking the families to forgive him, Brandy's cousin George shouted out, "Why did you kill them?" Caroline Love's sister Kathy lunged towards Henry, screaming at him, and had to be held back by deputies. The apology outraged most of the families, and they did not believe he was sincere. Though when reporters asked Brandy's cousin George if he could ever forgive Henry, he said, quote, "I can forgive him, but I'll never be able to forget what happened. But I can forgive him because that's how I was raised. I'll never know why my cousin or any of these other girls had to die. I haven't seen any remorse." Another pair who said they hoped God would forgive Henry was Deborah Slaughter's parents, Alfonso and Lovey. Lovey said, quote, "If his plea for forgiveness is sincere, I know God will forgive him. I pray for his soul that God will forgive him. I don't believe he was sincere. Only God can look into his heart." Henry got married in prison next to the state's execution chamber on June 5, 1998, to Rebecca Torres, who had worked as a prison nurse, but she did not at the time. The manager of the death row unit attended. Henry's defense attorney, Isabel Day, was the one who was their photographer and official witness to the ceremony. Rebecca wore a pale green dress adorned with pink flowers and a pearl necklace. Henry was donned in his red prison jumpsuit and black tennis shoes. The two met each other after Henry's arrest in 1994, and Rebecca resigned when she met him. She would go see him in jail every single week as he waited for his trial to begin. At the wedding, they were allowed to speak to each other for 20 minutes in the room they were married in. Afterwards, they had to talk to one another as they sat on opposite sides of a plastic glass shield and bars. They talked for about an hour. Henry has attempted to appeal his death sentence, alleging that he was coerced into his confessions, saying that investigators told him if he confessed, they would let him see his daughter and his girlfriend, violating his constitutional rights in the process. In 2000, the North Carolina Supreme Court denied his appeal, and in 2001, the U.S. Supreme Court also denied his appeal. Henry's last appeal was not only to get his death sentences thrown out, but also his convictions and to get a new trial. It was denied in 2005 by Superior Court Judge Charles Lamb. In 2022, on an episode of 2020, Brandy Henderson's son, Tyrese, who was almost killed by Henry at 10 months old, said, quote, "Truthfully, I wanted to die for a long time. As I started learning more, that would be too selfish. She fought too hard to keep me alive, and that's why I survived. That's why I didn't die." Talking about grief, he said, quote, "There's no time frame on grieving. There's no time frame on how long you can or can't miss somebody. I went through all of that, so I'm like, I've got to be doing something great for her. I've got to do something to the point where she can say, 'I'm proud of you, son.'" In the episode, Shauna Hawk's mother, Dee Sumter, said, quote, "Who would want to kill this beautiful, innocent, sweet, kind, loving person, my best friend, my daughter?" Also saying, "This is some kind of a bold demon here, one like never before. He had the literal gall to show up at a service for someone he knew he personally killed." She also talked about the support group she created, Mothers of Murdered Offspring, saying she will always support the group, but that she was no longer involved with it. At this time, there is still no date set for Henry Wallace's execution, as he sits in the Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. And that's the story of Henry Louis Wallace and the victims Tashonda Bethea, Sharon Nance, Caroline Love, Shauna Hawk, Audrey Spain, Valencia Jumper, Michelle Stinson, Vanessa Little Mack, Betty Jean Baucom, Deborah Ann Slaughter, and Brandy Henderson. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Before I go, I want to thank all the Patreon members on patreon.com/Reverie True Crime. Thank you so much to Jeff, Kelly, Zane, Gigi, Steve, Stephanie, Angel, TZ, Badcast Company, Jade, Matt, Chelsea, and Lorraine. Until next time, everyone, please stay safe and take care.